My husband grabbed my wrist the second I reached for my fork. Not gently. His fingers wrapped around my arm like he was pulling me back from a ledge, and I felt the force of it travel all the way up to my shoulder. "Don't," he said, one word, no explanation. I sat very still. The food in front of me was still steaming. My brother-in-law had cooked it himself. Spent nearly 2 hours in our kitchen while I rested upstairs. It smelled wonderful. It looked perfect. And my husband, who cannot see, who has not been able to see for 14 months, was staring straight ahead with an expression on his face I had never seen before. "Before you touch anything on that table," he said quietly, "I need you to hear something." What happened in the next 10 minutes changed everything I believed about family, about trust, and about the man I married. But before I tell you what he played for me on that phone, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to HeartPath's Stories, because what I'm about to share is something I still can't say out loud without my hands shaking. My name is Lyra. I have been married to my husband Anton for 6 years. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner, the kind where someone puts you next to a stranger and you end up talking until the restaurant closes. Anton was the kind of person who asked real questions. Not "what do you do?" but "what made you decide that?" He remembered everything you told him. 3 weeks after that dinner, he called me on a Tuesday evening just to read me a poem he had come across in a book. I thought that was either the most romantic thing I had ever encountered or a little bit insane. Probably both. I said yes when he asked me out. We married 4 years later in a small ceremony at a vineyard in Virginia. Nothing extravagant. Just people we loved, string lights, and my grandmother's ring on my finger. Anton worked as a quality control supervisor at a manufacturing plant outside Richmond. He was meticulous, detail-oriented, the kind of man who triple-checked everything before signing his name. We had a comfortable life. A small house we were slowly renovating on weekends, a rescue dog named after a jazz musician, and plans we kept adding to like a running grocery list. Travel, maybe a bigger yard, maybe children when the timing felt right. The timing stopped mattering on a Thursday afternoon in September. An equipment malfunction at the plant released a chemical vapor. Anton was the closest person to the source. He was hospitalized within the hour. By the time I reached the emergency room, he had already been moved to a specialist unit. A doctor I had never met before walked me to a small room off the main corridor and told me, in the careful, measured way that doctors speak when they are trying to be kind, that the damage to my husband's optic nerves was severe, that he would need time, that they would know more in the coming weeks. What they knew 6 weeks later was that my husband's sight was not coming back. Not fully. Not the way it was before. I remember driving home from the hospital that night and sitting in the driveway for 20 minutes without getting out of the car. Not crying. Just sitting. There was a part of my brain that kept trying to rewrite what the doctor had said, kept searching for a version of those words that meant something different. There wasn't one. Anton handled it better than I did, at least on the surface. He said very little in those first weeks. He relearned things with a quiet patience that I found both admirable and heartbreaking. How to navigate our kitchen, how to manage his phone with voice commands, how to walk the route from our bedroom to the bathroom without touching the walls. He refused to make it dramatic. He refused to be pitied. "I'm still here," he told me one night when I broke down apologizing, for I wasn't even sure what. "I'm right here, Lyra. We figure it out." We tried. But figuring it out is harder than it sounds. I was working full-time. The insurance paperwork was a second full-time job. Anton could not drive, could not return to his position at the plant, and the therapy schedule alone required coordination. I wasn't always able to manage. We were drowning slowly and politely. That was when my brother-in-law moved in. Anton's older brother had always been on the edges of our life. Present at holidays, reliable in the way that distant family is reliable. A familiar face, but not a close one. He and Anton had a complicated history, the kind that most siblings accumulate without ever fully addressing. But when he heard what happened, he appeared at our front door on a Saturday morning with 2 bags and an offer. "You shouldn't be doing this alone," he told me. "Let me help." I hesitated. Anton said quietly that it was fine, that the help would be useful. So he moved into the spare room. And for a while, he was exactly what he said he would be. He drove Anton to appointments. He handled the grocery shopping, the yard, the tasks that had been piling up since the accident. He cooked most evenings, and he was a genuinely good cook, something I had not expected. He and Anton would sit after dinner and talk, and sometimes I would hear them laughing from the other room. And it felt like something was being repaired between them that had been broken long before the accident. I was grateful, deeply, embarrassingly grateful. I told my coworkers about him. I told my mother he was a godsend. I believed that completely. It was around the 4th month that I started to notice small things, and I want to be clear that I did not understand what I was noticing at the time. I filed them away as stress, as adjustment, as the 1,000 small misunderstandings that come from people living together in a difficult situation. Anton began going quiet in a different way. Not the quiet of grief or fatigue which I had come to recognize. Something more deliberate. He would stop talking when his brother entered a room. I assumed they had argued about something. I did not ask. There were nights I would find Anton sitting in the dark, which meant something different now than it used to. With his head tilted slightly, like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. When I asked if he was okay, he always said yes. When I pushed, he said he was tired. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was another problem to carry. His brother started spending more time on the phone. Not unusual in itself, but he began taking calls in the backyard or in his car with the door closed. Once, I came downstairs earlier than expected and found him on the back porch, speaking in a low voice that stopped the moment he heard the door. He turned and smiled and said he was just catching up with an old friend. Something about the smile felt slightly off, like it arrived half a second too late. I poured myself a glass of water and told myself I was reading into things. I was so tired. That is the only way I can explain it. When you are running on the kind of exhaustion that comes from caregiving and working and worrying, your instincts start to blur. You second-guess yourself constantly. You tell yourself you are being unfair. Anton said nothing. He kept saying nothing, and I kept not asking why, and the months moved forward the way they do. 2 weeks ago, his brother arrived at the house in the early afternoon with 4 bags of groceries. He was cheerful, louder than usual. He said he wanted to make something special for dinner. A recipe he had been thinking about, something that would feel like a celebration. I did not ask what we were celebrating. I was glad someone else was thinking about dinner. I went upstairs to rest. I had a headache that had been building since morning. Through the ceiling, I could hear the sounds of someone cooking, cabinet doors, water running, the low hum of the stove. When I came back downstairs an hour later, my brother-in-law was pulling on his jacket by the front door. "Already done," he said. "It just needs another 20 minutes. I covered everything to keep it warm." He smiled and picked up his keys. Something came up. "You two eat without me. Don't let it get cold." I told him I was sorry he had to leave. He hugged me, longer than usual, the kind of hug that feels like it might mean something. And then he was gone. His car pulled out of the driveway, and the house went quiet. I walked to the living room where Anton was sitting. He was very still. He had been very still for hours, I realized. He left, I said. "Dinner's ready. Are you hungry?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Come sit down first." "I thought we'd eat while it's warm." "Come sit down, Lyra." His voice was quiet, but there was something underneath it, something I could not name. I sat in the chair across from him. He had his phone in his hand, his thumb resting on the screen. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything." I felt my stomach drop. The way it drops when you already somehow know that what comes next will be hard. "Okay," I said. "About 3 months ago," he said slowly, "I started hearing things that didn't make sense. Partial conversations, tones of voice, things that were strange in ways I couldn't explain." He paused. "When you lose one sense, the others get louder. I don't know how else to describe it. I started hearing things I don't think I was supposed to hear." He told me that one evening, about 10 weeks ago, he had heard his brother on the phone in the backyard. The window near the patio had been left open. Anton had not meant to eavesdrop, but he heard a name, the name of our insurance company, and then the words "after Anton is gone" spoken as if that were simply a fact. A timeline, a plan. He said he had not wanted to believe it. He said he spent 2 weeks telling himself he had misheard, misunderstood, that grief and pain and adjustment were making him paranoid. But the voice had been clear, his brother's voice, and the words had been clear. He had called an old friend from before the accident, someone he trusted completely, someone with no connection to our household. And he asked for help. His friend installed a small recording device, placed it while his brother was out running errands. Not visible, not on a high shelf, just a small thing tucked into the room where calls were most often taken. Anton pressed play. I am not going to repeat everything that was on that recording. I cannot. What I will tell you is that there were 2 calls, played back to back. In the first one, my brother-in-law spoke with someone, I don't know who, about a life insurance policy, about its value, about the fact that he was listed as the secondary beneficiary on a policy Anton had taken out years ago, before we were married, that he had never gotten around to updating. He spoke about timing, about patience. In the second call, he said something that I have not been able to stop hearing since. She's not going to know what it was. She'll just think he got sick. People in his condition get sick all the time. I sat in that chair and I could not move. I could not speak. I was aware of the food in the next room getting cold, and I was aware of my own breathing. And I was aware of nothing else. Anton reached across the space between us and found my hand. His aim was almost perfect. I know, he said quietly, I know. I said his name. I think I said it twice. I couldn't form any other words. I've already spoken to a lawyer, he said. 3 weeks ago. Everything is handled. The insurance policy has been updated. The joint accounts are structured differently now. There is nothing to gain from this. Not anymore. He squeezed my hand once. I made sure of that before tonight. I looked at him. This man who cannot see my face, who navigates our house by memory and sound, who has spent 14 months rebuilding himself from the ground up. And I thought about all the evenings I had assumed he was just sitting quietly. All the nights I thought he was only resting. He had been listening. He had been building a case. He had been protecting us both without saying a single word to me, because he did not want me to carry it until he was certain. Why didn't you tell me? I finally managed. Because I needed proof, he said simply. And because I didn't want you to look at him and know. Before I was ready. You would have looked at him differently. He would have seen it. He was right. He was absolutely right. I am not good at hiding things. My face has always been the most honest part of me. Headlights crossed the front window. I heard a car door. He's back, Anton said. He had heard it before I registered the lights. I stood up. My legs felt strange beneath me. The front door opened, and my brother-in-law stepped inside with an easy smile, already talking. Forgot my phone charger, he said. Did you eat? Is the food still? He stopped. We were both standing in the dining room. The food was on the table exactly as he'd left it, covered, untouched. I was standing. Anton was standing beside me. The smile dropped very slowly, the way a curtain drops when the rod pulls loose from the wall. He looked at the table. He looked at me. He looked at Anton. He said his brother's name. Anton said, we heard the recordings. The color left his face so completely and so quickly that it looked almost theatrical, like something from a film. His eyes moved to the covered dishes on the table. Back to Anton. Back to me. His mouth opened and closed once without producing any sound. Then he started talking. Not admitting, denying, rationalizing, redirecting. It was the wrong call, a misunderstanding. The recording was out of context. He would never. He loved his brother. I had always misunderstood him. This was not what it sounded like. I pressed the button on Anton's phone that dialed the number he had already set up and ready. We had called the police before he came back. Anton had anticipated that he might return. He said his brother had a habit of forgetting things on purpose. An old pattern he recognized from childhood. The sirens were close by the time my brother-in-law stopped talking. He sat down on the couch without being asked, and he stared at the floor, and he did not say anything else. 2 officers came to the door. They were calm and professional and efficient. My brother-in-law stood when they asked him to stand. He did not fight. He went quietly in a way that seemed less like cooperation and more like defeat, like a man who had been outmaneuvered and knew it. The door closed. Anton stood in the middle of the room, with his head slightly tilted, listening to the retreating sound of the police car. Then the house was quiet in a way it had not been quiet in over a year. I walked to him. I put my arms around him and pressed my forehead against his shoulder, and I stayed there until my breathing evened out. "You're okay," he said into my hair. "We're okay." "You should have told me," I said again. I didn't mean it as a complaint. I just needed to say it. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to say it and keep you safe at the same time." I thought about that for a long time afterward. The space between telling someone the truth and keeping them safe. The places where those two things intersect, and the places where they don't. In the weeks that followed, we learned more than we had wanted to know. The investigation turned up financial records showing that my brother-in-law had been in serious debt for over 2 years. The kind of debt that comes from decisions made quietly and compounded badly. The insurance policy had been something he had known about for years. He had done research. He had been patient. The substance found in the food, and yes, they found something, tested by the investigators, was identified within a few days. I will not describe what it was. I will only say that we were both meant to be sick. Seriously sick. The kind of sick that, in a man already dealing with the medical complexities Anton had been managing, could have looked like a complication. Something that just happened. My brother-in-law is facing charges. The process is ongoing. I do not want to say more than that while it is still moving through the system, but I will say this. There is no version of the outcome in which I feel something as simple as satisfaction. What I feel is more complicated and more sad. Anton had surgery 4 months after the incident. A specialist we had been referred to. One we could finally afford to see properly, with the insurance and legal matters finally resolved. Identified something that earlier doctors had not fully explored. The surgery did not restore his vision completely. It was never going to, but he can see shapes now, light and shadow, the outline of a door frame, the general shape of my face. He told me, the first morning after the bandages came off and the adjustment had begun, that I looked exactly the way he remembered. I told him he needed to get his eyes checked. He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that starts in his chest, and I thought, there it is. There is the man I stood next to in a vineyard in Virginia and said yes to without question. We still have the rescue dog. We renamed him recently after all of it. His original name was borrowed from an old jazz musician. We kept the jazz theme but gave him a new one. Fresh start. He did not seem to mind. I think about trust differently now. I think I used to believe that trust was something you gave freely to the people who showed up for you. That presence was proof. That showing up, day after day, with meals and kindness and a hand outstretched. That this was what it meant to be someone worthy of your faith. I understand now that presence can be worn as clothing, that patience can be strategy. That the people who smile at you from across the dinner table are not always smiling because they love you. That is the part that still frightens me. Not what my brother-in-law tried to do, but how entirely ordinary the days around it looked. How normal the meals smelled. How natural the kindness seemed. My husband, who could not see, saw more clearly than I did. He listened when I wasn't listening. He protected us both with his eyes closed. I don't think I will ever take quiet for granted again. Silence can be a person doing nothing, or it can be a person paying very close attention. Pay attention to the quiet ones, especially the ones you love.